Welcome to The Line. This is the part of our program where each week we invite people from the community to share their thoughts on the latest news and headlines of the week and issues people are talking about here in New Mexico. We're going to start with the middle class. In the past week, the Santa Fe Reporter and the Santa Fe New Mexican both reported that New Mexico's middle class shrank in recent years, and data from across the country certainly shows the middle class is getting smaller in nearly every state, but New Mexico's decline is even sharper than most. Here to talk about this trend, we have Tom Garrity from the Garrity Group PR, Julianne Grimm, editor of the Santa Fe Reporter, Antoinette Cedillo Lopez with Enlace Comunitario in Albuquerque, and Stephen Spitz, host of New Mexico People, Places, and Ideas on KUNM. Tom, start us off here. Do you personally see evidence? This data, this facts, and there's also anecdotal evidence when you sort of look around Albuquerque and look around at your peers and friends and family. Do we really know what middle class means in New Mexico anymore? Let's just kind of start there. It's hard to put a number on it, isn't it?
It really is. And I thought that the survey was quite fascinating. Mm-hmm. You know, when you look at the impact, not just in New Mexico, but around the region that the 2008 recession has had. I think the 2008 recession has really impacted the middle class significantly.
Right. And, in what way?
It's evaporating.
Yeah.
You know, and not to make anybody's political point or anything like that, I think it really is becoming a case of haves and have-nots.
Right.
You know, folks who are really living from paycheck to paycheck, who are really leveraged, you know, beyond their means, and then those who are really not having to worry about that.
There you go. Antoinette, good to see you again, by the way. Your organization is doing great stuff. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Tom just mentioned something interesting that you're starting to hear a little bit more of. That's the gap, the acknowledgement of the gap that we have here. We don't really talk about it that much, it seems to me.
And that gap is pretty profound.
Yeah.
I work with some of the more vulnerable people in the state, and it's just people keep coming and coming and coming. That gap is really, it's hurting.
So where does the middle class fit in there in that gap?
Well, the interesting thing to me is it's all relative.
Yeah.
Growing up in New Mexico, I always felt solidly middle class until I went to UCLA. Then I felt very poor.
Right.
And so there is that relative aspect of it, but what's scary is we're seeing more and more poor people. And then we do have, as you pointed out, the rich people who come in who just don't have to worry about it. And that disconnect is not healthy for the state.
Absolutely.
And so we'll see what happens.
Julianne, since 2000, we're talking about a significant drop in what constitutes middle class for New Mexicans here. A pretty healthy drop. That's not that long ago, 2000. So is there anything we've come up with in your reporting or anything else that has a why to this? Why is our middle class shrinking so?
Well, one of the things I think is interesting about some of the analysis of this report talks about wages. Wages for the middle class have changed a little since 2000, while wages for those low wage earners, while the high wage earners continue to make more money, substantially more money. So we see that the gap exists and the gap is widening.
Right.
I think that this idea about what it means to be middle class in New Mexico compared to a place like California that you mentioned, our top end is $675,000, which sounds like an astronomical amount of money to me and many of my peers. People who are looking at student loan debt that they can't begin to touch.
Right.
But in other states, they're topping a couple $1 million.
That's right. And you're mentioning that 660 and change gets you into the 0.1%. The super rich here in New Mexico, and as Stephen, as Julianne just mentioned, that's about half what the super rich earn in other states, not just in the surrounding area, but across the country.
So I think the key to understanding this is about 60 to 70% of total GDP in New Mexico is consumer spending. All right, so when you get a recession, what you get are businesses laying off people, businesses closing, you get a larger group of people looking for work, okay? So you get lower median income. So that's by definition shrinking the middle class.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So, I mean, the real question is, what do you do about it, right? What do you do about it? And, Keynesian economics says you need outside money. You need to jumpstart that economy. And I think this is where perhaps we had a non-Keynesian as governor. Because what she did was, Richardson had this unbelievable office in Washington, D.C. He had 5 employees plus another worker. And they got literally billions of dollars from the feds. On Governor Martinez's second day in office, she closed that office. She closed that office. She's also she's also reserved large amounts of the budget, 10% as opposed to the more conventional 5%. That's $300 billion a year for all those years.
Wow.
Right? So that's money that you're taking out of the economy. All right, and you're not putting back into the economy. So that not spending. not spending. And then finally, we just heard from Tim Keller. And, he says there's like, what, 1.2 billion in unencumbered funds.
That's right.
No one seems interested in this.
That's right.
That money needs to go out the door.
Explain what unencumbered is, by the way, for the folks. What that money means. What that.
Well, I mean, I think when the legislature passes various projects, it dedicates funds to those projects. Those funds are encumbered. They're not necessarily encumbered, though. They can be freed up. Depends on the actual wording of the legislation. So what Auditor Keller is saying, there's about 1.2 billion with a B, in unencumbered money. Wow. So, that money needs to be used. We're still in a recession. Our unemployment rate is still very high.
That's right. Relatedly, if that's a word, Tom Garrity, is our capital outlay dust-up we just had. Ostensibly, that means jobs, money in people's pockets, middle-class money to be spent. Absolutely. The impact of not having that deal, and should we, in fact, see this through the lens of perhaps a special session in light of what's happening with our middle class? Is that enough reason to have a special?
Well, it is. I mean, when you look at the overall state of the economy, and our own survey has shown that, residents overall feel more optimistic about the economy, but they're realistic that the economy itself has really been just devastating over the last 2 years.
Right.
And so to take 250 or whatever that $200+ million figure is out of the economy and just put it on the sidelines is horrible. I mean, and that directly impacts the middle class and lower wage income earners. I mean, and those are projects around the state, predominantly in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, but these are the types of projects that build economic development and prepare New Mexico for action.
That's right.
So, I'm hoping that, there can be some kind of middle ground found that will help to establish, some justification from Santa Fe to say, yes, we do need this.
Sure. I want to check with you on something. I mentioned something. Anecdotally, you can see things are happening to the middle class here. You've been around a long time. You've hired a lot of people. You know how the economy works around the city. I'm sensing almost a generational shift where a lot of folks are moving out of positions where they're earning decent money, 50, 60, 70,000 range, somewhere around there. Yeah. Their replacements are not coming in at that same salary levels here. Correct. I've heard this anecdotally a lot of different places, that $70,000 gig can suddenly turn into a $45,000 gig and have more work attached to it, actually.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of government contractors in this city, which will remain nameless, which have done just that. They have encouraged people to retire, and in turn have brought in the other very well-qualified professionals at a much lower rate without benefits. They're calling them contractors. That's right. They're using that word very loosely. And so, there's definitely a shift. I'm not convinced it's a good shift for the city, but it's a temporary one.
There you go. Getting to the middle class, Antoinette Cedillo-Lopez. This is another challenge for people. If you're working hard, you're getting your education, you're getting somewhere, but you're coming from a family that's had some challenges, what do you look forward to here in New Mexico? See, this is part of the problem why people leave, it seems to me.
Well, that is, I'm very grateful that my children are still in the state, but the opportunities for them are so much better elsewhere.
Right.
And we've really got to change that. And just the special session issue that you just
Love to have your opinion on it. Yeah.
Those are, I just can't believe that they couldn't come together. And I'm really concerned that they're talking about working out a deal in advance. Right. And behind closed doors without the public debate that we really need. I feel it's a no-brainer. We have to have a special session.
If we had a two-day session that rang in somewhere 100,000, 125,000, is that a good swap of money? In your view, is that a prudent use of money?
It's a necessary expenditure of money. When you're talking about having that much money just sit doing nothing, we were talking about, well, what actually happens with that money? Right. I'm not even sure where it goes.
That's a good point. I don't either. It's interesting. Special session, Julianne Grimm. And again, expectations are difficult to manage in these kind of things. No one's expecting us to have the answer in a two-day session. No one's looking for that. But just a sign of forward progress.
I mean, I think when you bring up the idea of prudent, how did we spend the time that we had in the 60-day session? What happened and what didn't happen? This is a big deal, and I think that the lawmakers perhaps owe it to the people of New Mexico. The governor owes it to the people of New Mexico to get back to the table and try. I agree on the transparency front as well. I find it troubling when we start talking about going into it with a deal.
Right.
We all know, those of us in the jaded media, we know that the deals happen behind closed doors, but we'd like to at least nod to doing it in public.
What would be a better system? What do you think? Let me back up. I'm going to re-ask that. Someone actually said to me, we should go to a skunk works system here in New Mexico, meaning some way regular citizens can throw in ideas about what would make the economy work. Does that have some relevance when you hear something like that?
Certainly. I mean, and you're seeing things happen on a small scale that people appreciate that are actually having an effect. In the city of Santa Fe, they just launched another round of grants for small business startups for what they're calling the next big thing. And I think when you look
at reality television, perhaps?
We hope not.
It's a joke about The Bachelor. Sorry about that.
It'd be a small business idea. Perhaps some young people that want to do a business and need a little shot in the arm from the government.
Right.
I wonder if the state could look at those kinds of projects and get them rolled out on a bigger scale.
Exactly.
I know that's not the silver bullet either, but sitting around and arguing and doing nothing is not doing us
That's a good point. Stephen, another anecdotal piece of evidence you see driving around, which was highlighted in a journal story not long ago in the business section about how Nob Hill businesses, when they're closing, are not reopening with new owners. They're staying dark, so to speak. And the only businesses that seem to be opening are ones that are selling craft beer because they have the margin, quite simply. They can make the money to make the rent. So there's a pickle. There's a high rent in areas where there's high traffic and high chances of success, but not enough folks have that kind of working capital to get into a storefront situation. It's a real middle-class dilemma when you look at it that way.
Right. Well, I mean, I just go back to what I was indicated earlier. What you need to do is increase aggregate demand. All right. People don't have money to spend.
That's right.
All right. When people don't have money to spend, stores close.
That's right.
All right. So if and it's supply and demand for the storefronts in Nob Hill.
That's right.
So that's what's happening. Let me just say a word about the special session.
Please. Yeah.
So I have from two reliable sources that discussions have already started. That Senator Pete Campos of Las Vegas has been talking to the governor and to the governor's staff about trying to work out a deal on the special session. The biggest hangup is the $45 million for roads. The governor wants. The governor wants. Right. The governor wants to bond it, and that's the way it's always been done. Senator John Arthur Smith, for some reason, wants to have a gas tax. That's a regressive tax. All right. In an economy that's bad. I think the governor is right on this one. But that's something that can be worked out. But here's sort of the bombshell part of it, that Senator Campos apparently is also talking to the governor about, as part of this special session, her getting behind the constitutional amendment to have 1% of the permanent fund dedicated to early childhood. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Right.
Those discussions are going on,
right.
And that alone is a huge positive. So let's hope. I mean, the governor's point would be, hey, look, I'm flexible. I change when things change. Education hasn't been going perfectly.
Sure.
I want to help the little kids that I'm always pictured with.
Sure.
So let's hope that happens.
Interesting.
But those discussions at least have already started.
A little scoop here, Stephen Spitz.
A scoop.
Look at
That
this.
is a
Not
big
bad.
scoop.
It's a big scoop. Up next, we hear why the Fort Sill Apache tribe wants to open a casino here in New Mexico.